Welcome, everyone, to The Good Fight, the show in which we try to highlight points of disagreement as well as any common ground that exists between contending parties. I'm Robert Wright of Blogging Heads TV, the heard but not seen moderator. And we have two very well-versed guests today to talk about immigration reform. One of them is Mickey Kaus, author of the Kaus Files blog at the Daily Caller, author of the book The End of Equality, and of course best known as a co-founder of Blogging Heads TV. He is known as a skeptic, you might say, of immigration reform. Tamar Jacoby is president and CEO of Immigration Works USA, which is quite supportive of immigration reform. And she is editor of the book Reinventing the Melting Pot, The New Immigrants and What It Means to Be American. Thanks to both of you for joining us.
Pleasure.
Glad to be here.
At this point you say, I was going to say, Mickey, at this point you say glad to be here. So, Mickey, let's start with you and just ask, do you have a sense for the fundamental issue that divides you two and maybe divides you from immigration reform proponents in general?
I think I do. I mean, my basic perspective is we have 11 million undocumented immigrants in the country. The issue is more one of timing than will they ever get an amnesty. In other words, we had an immigration reform in 86. We were promised enforcement in exchange for amnesty. We got the amnesty. We didn't get the enforcement. Now we feel, because any amnesty is an encouragement for further illegal immigration, we want to make sure the enforcement is in place to withstand that further wave. So it's mainly a question of timing at this point. My side has more or less conceded that we are, willing to have an eventual amnesty if we're sure that it's going to be the last amnesty. And we're even willing to take a further risk of saying we'll accept 3 or 4 big enforcement measures as enough to protect against the last amnesty protect against the next amnesty without any assurance that they're actually going to do the job. But if you do these 3 or 4 things first and they're in place and they work, sure, we can have an amnesty. It's a question of timing. The problem is your side won't accept
and I don't think, first of all, I'm not sure I have a side. I mean, I'm definitely for immigration reform, but I'm not sure I agree with everyone else you're kind of caricaturing as the reform advocates. But I think the most important part of reform is not what you're calling the amnesty. The enforcement is key. It has to be part of it, but it's not the most important part. The most important part of immigration reform is figuring out for the future what kind of immigrants and who and how many and what kind of skills and whatever we want and need in America, and setting up a system so that they come legally. And I think that will take care of kind of some of the problems that concern you. Yes, you need enforcement in the future to make sure people aren't running across the border, but the real way to deal with the people running across the border is to figure out what workers we need here and allow them to come legally. 99.999% of the people who ran across the border in the past 20 years would rather have come on a bus or a plane with a visa and a ticket. And if we recognize that lots of industries, from farms to hotels to meat processing to construction to janitorial, can't find American workers to do those jobs and need some immigrant workers. Once they've tried to find Americans, if they can't, should be able to hire immigrants and create a legal program for people. You're going to have much less problem on the border. You should have enforcement, but the key part of the solution, I think, is about a whole leg of the stool that you're not talking about. The 11 million people already here, sure, let's deal with them, but that's kind of dealing with the past problem. That's not the heart of reform.
Well, if you were willing not to deal with the 11 million here, I think we could come to an agreement pretty quickly.
I think we do have to do something about it.
The problem is, for all your elaborate plans about regulating the flow and which skills and how many people, before you can do that, you need control. Otherwise, it's all ridiculous. You can set the quota, and the quota will be exceeded by people coming across the border.
But one of the best ways to get control.
So you have to have control first, and that's where enforcement comes in.
One of the best ways you're going to get control.
Wait. I think we've reached a point where you may or may not disagree, and I want to get clear on this. I think Mickey's view is that if you offer a path to legalized status and ultimate citizenship for people who are here, however arduous that is, however many years it takes, And however firmly you insist that you're not going to do this again, right, that people who come over after the start date don't have access to that path, I believe Mickey's view is that that will serve as an incentive for more people to come over the border because they won't believe you that there's not going to be another round of this reform.
The real reason that people come
first,
over the border...
Mickey, is that right? Mickey, am I right that you believe that?
Yes, if you let people stay here legally while waiting for this citizenship, they've got what they wanted, and future other people in foreign countries will see that happen, and they will come illegally too, yes.
But you think the reform actually increases the flow of immigrants from... of future illegal immigrants.
Yes, and I think if you give legal channels, that's some sort of safety valve, but it's not 100% safety valve. If people don't meet the quota, they'll come anyway.
But most people want to come. Most people come to work, and if you create a system where you have quotas and where the legitimate the jobs that are open, in order to work, you have to be here legally. So a good worksite enforcement, a good E-Verify program, there's not going to be much incentive to come if there's not going to be a job for you. People come to work. There's no point in being here illegally if you can't work. And there's no point in being here unemployed. But you'd rather be unemployed at home in Mexico. It's cheaper, it's warmer, you have a lot of friends.
Well, we agree. So, if we had a good E-Verify program first, that's one of the three things that my side is insisting on. So we've agreed.
But how are you going to... What's going to happen? You're going to put an E-Verify program, and then you're going to have 11 million people here out of work. Like, what good is that going to do?
No, the E-Verify program only applies to new hires.
People do change jobs. Surely you don't want to.
The three things.
Surely you don't want to have people who can't change jobs and are stuck with their employer because they're illegal. That's not a democratic view.
They have four options now. They can. Let me just say what the things my side wants. We want an E-Verify system. We want a fence, and we want. Although some of us don't want a fence so much, I am one that does. And we want a system to check visa overstays. The E-Verify is the one we're talking about now. It applies to new hires. Yes, it would make it harder for existing illegals who are working with employers they don't like to change jobs. They have three choices now. They can work in the underground.
Problematic to me. That sounds problematic to me.
It's not.
I'm not the Democrat in the debate.
It's not perfect, but they can stay at their job. They can go in the underground economy. Or they can go home. The only option that's closed to them is the fourth option of switching jobs for a better employer. They got 3 out of 4. It's an imperfect system. They came here illegally. They can't have everything.
Yeah, so, I mean, I just think, a population the size of Ohio living in our midst on the wrong side of the law, whatever your values are. If you're worried about law and order and security, people have never undergone a background check. If you're worried about political values and, incorporating people into our society and into the body politic, it's not a good idea. I just think we've got to do something about that. And most of those people are not going home. Most of those people have been here, more than a decade. They're not going home. We've tried making the laws tougher so they go home.
They've been here for 30 years.
We got to do something about them.
They've been here for 30 years. They can wait 5 more years while we get an E-Verify system in place.
Well,
the society hasn't fallen apart for the last 30 years.
So that's where we disagree.
There's not an imperative.
I think we should be in a hurry. That's where we disagree. I think we should, for the good of the country, we should have them come forward and register. It's, I don't see what good we're getting out of waiting. Like, who does that help?
What we're getting out of it is we're sure that the enforcement will work, because as soon as they are legalized, all the political incentives for having the enforcement will go away. Whereas when we do the enforcement first, the political incentives.
Okay, but can I ask get a point of clarification here? I mean, it's my understanding that the Senate bill actually has, to some degree, a lot of the stuff you're demanding, Mickey, like really a significantly increased flow of resources to border control.
No, it has resources, but it doesn't have E-Verify. It doesn't have the exit
entry system. Yes, it has E-Verify. That's ridiculous.
It doesn't have E-Verify. It legalizes before.
The Senate bill.
No, it legalizes before E-Verify.
The Senate bill it's like the healthcare.gov. It's going to take a while for E-Verify to be applied to all the businesses in America, but it's one of the dramatic changes in the Senate bill that every business in America, whether they've ever hired an immigrant or ever dreamt of hiring an immigrant, are going to have to run people through an electronic government system.
First, it's written weirdly. Second, the 11 million are legalized before E-Verify takes effect. So as soon as they're legalized, the ACLU is going to sue to knock out E-Verify. That's the whole argument. That's what the argument is. The argument is as soon as you get your legalization, the the people who are for legalization are going to turn around and knock out the enforcement. It's going to be the same as 86.
So I disagree with that.
No enforcement, but amnesty.
I totally disagree with that. I think there's much more political power in America now in favor of tough immigration enforcement than there is in favor of no enforcement.
Don't be silly. The
Latino
vote is bigger, and everybody's falling over themselves to suck up to it. They're going to be only
bigger
in the future.
The Latino vote is not against immigration enforcement. The Latino vote will be happy with immigration enforcement.
Of course it is. All the impetus now is to stop the deportations that are ripping families apart.
Right now when
there's
11 million people here, who are on the wrong side of the law. Once people have legal status, people are not going to say, "Oh, we want lots more people to come." That's never been.
They're not going to want to rip. Well, that's what happened last time.
No, it's not.
People were amnestied in '86. Yet all of a sudden, the new 11 million. All of a sudden, you couldn't enforce against them.
No, not all of a sudden. You had 11 million. You had 11 million build up over 20 years because we don't have a legal way for people to get here. If you're Mexican and you have no family here and you want to work in America, you have a big choice. You can pay a smuggler to walk across the desert, or you can pay a smuggler to walk across the desert.
You think
because we have no legal avenues that over 20 years a new illegal population built up. Not because people ran in after '86.
You think after the 11 million are legalized and another 2 million come, the Latinos are going to be perfectly happy with
There's not
deporting.
Going to be 2 million come.
Well, how do you know?
Because why would they? There's not going to be jobs for them.
Well,
People don't come when there are no jobs.
Let me be clear on. Wait. The
flow now is down to a quarter.
Hold on. I am the voice of God. I'm a little unclear. When you say they won't come because there won't be jobs, do you mean because the E-Verify system will make it impossible for them to get jobs?
No,
is that
because
the premise?
The jobs are filled. Because the 11 million have jobs, and the job market is not growing. We're not going to have 2 million new jobs.
But there's not a fixed quota
in the next couple of years. No, but so here's just a number. The number of people coming now is 1/4 of what it was before the downturn because they come to work. And sure, America's going to create some jobs in the next few years. And if there aren't Americans to fill them, immigrants will come. But if we create a program that allows immigrants to come and fill them legally, you're not going to have a lot of pressure. I mean, President Bush used to say it relieves the pressure on the border. Well, no one would rather come illegally.
Right, but
very few employers would rather hire people illegally.
If Juan comes illegally and works for $10, and his brother Roberto doesn't qualify for the quota because it's been met, he can come and work for $8 off the books. He's going to get hired. There will be jobs for illegals. They may be jobs in the underground economy.
Most of the jobs
They may be jobs at lower wages that are legal, but there will be jobs. That's the way it's always worked.
There will be some. Most employers would rather be on the right side of the law, whether it's a small family business where you're putting your family savings in or a big brand where your brand is on the line. Most employers would rather be on the right side of the law.
But there's a huge underground.
85% of the employers who hire unauthorized immigrants run them through the system as if they were legal, withhold taxes, pay them the same as they're paying their Americans. The people who are running the sweatshop and exploiting them at the $3 an hour is a tiny segment.
It's a tiny segment. What percent of employment is in the underground market? I think it's a substantial segment.
No, but most immigrants, unauthorized immigrants, are not undocumented. They're falsely documented. Most people have some kind of papers that they show, and they get their taxes withheld, and the employers pay matching, we
want to enforce the law against the falsely documented
too. There'll be some.
We want to enforce the law against the falsely documented too. So you're saying
she's in favor of E-Verify, and tomorrow your premise is that E-Verify would work, right?
And that the market would work. Let me
get clear, Tamar. It seems to me there's a couple of reasons you're not worried about what Mickey's worried about, which is an ongoing, even possibly accelerated influx of illegal immigrants. One of these is economic. You think that the jobs would kind of, there wouldn't be the new jobs of the kind that would draw.
No, there will be jobs, but if we fill those jobs using a legal worker visa program, those jobs would be filled by legal workers.
There would not be vacant jobs, you think, and as part of that, related to that, is you think E-Verify can work. You also think that
tougher enforcement against the bad guys, right?
And you think there would. Oh, I'm sorry. Against the what?
Against employers who are gaming the system and who are paying $3.
And also you think there would not be a strong political constituency against strong border enforcement if we solved the problem of the workers who are here. You think even the Latino community would not give you trouble on strong border enforcement?
I think that's right. I think people would say, we've found some answer for the 11 or 12 million who are already here. They're integrating into society and doing whatever they're going to do, and then workers will come legally. And Latinos don't have a big interest in a crazy open border with people flooding the market, and especially people at the low end of the job market. The last thing they want is people coming and undercutting them. So I don't think there'll be a big constituency against control. Once my metaphor is what we have now is something like prohibition, and people find the enforcement that goes with prohibition oppressive. But once we have a regulated legal system where we can fill the jobs and people who want to come to work can come to work, people will accept it.
Unless you want open borders, you're going to have to set the quota below what the market would equilibrate at. The market will equilibrate when every poor person in the world wants to come here and work for a cheap wage. Well,
but they don't. But that's not
if
what
your argument is they
shows.
Don't, then you don't need any control at all because it'll all equilibrate itself.
Well, I think the market will mostly
of course, more people.
But they don't come when there are no jobs. They don't come when in the middle of the downturn, people stop.
But you yourself said that low wage Latinos who are here don't want more workers. That implies that the more workers would come without control. Otherwise, you don't need any control at all.
I believe that the flow is mostly market driven, and that if we fill the jobs with legal workers, there will be very little incentive for people to come illegally. Sure, there will be some who will try, and they'll learn that it doesn't pay, and then there will be employers who will try, and will do tough enforcement against them. And sure, we should have tough border security, and we should have E-Verify. I believe this has to come with controls, but I think it's like prohibition and liquor licenses. It's not people buying liquor against licensing is not a big problem now because there's a legal way to do it. It was a problem when we had prohibition.
The key problem is if we do the legalization before E-Verify, the E-Verify, your liquor licensing system, will never take effect. The ACLU will sue, a liberal federal judge will throw it out. It will not take effect. They will undermine it exactly the same way they undermined the enforcement regime in year 6.
Come on, Mickey. We have all kinds of law enforcement in America that has not gotten
overturned. Well, so if you're so confident that it will withstand, then let it withstand judicial scrutiny, and then we can have our legalization. I'm perfectly happy to agree with that. That's the obvious compromise. The obvious compromise here is do the E-Verify, then have the legalization.
Mickey. I think she's spoken to that point. She thinks the problem is so urgent we need to start dealing with the people here now. But Mickey, let me just ask you a question. You sound sure that E-Verify will not work under any circumstances because it will not withstand legal challenges. You seem completely sure that it's not going to work.
We put it into effect. We have them. We let the ACLU sue, and we hold off legalization until it's upheld by the courts. I guarantee you that if legalization is delayed until it's upheld by the courts, the chances that it will be upheld by the Roberts Court will be much greater than if people are already legalized and it's just
liberal. For what it's worth. Just for what it's worth, that's a political impossibility, right? So,
it's a political impossibility because you say it's a political. We're negotiating.
There's not a Democrat in Congress who's going to let it happen that way.
Right. Well, that's the problem. That's why we're not going to get a deal.
There's not a Democrat in Congress who's going to let it happen.
Right. That's why we're not going to get a deal, and that doesn't bother me. Let's not get a deal. Let's have a new Congress. The Republicans will win. Maybe we'll have a new president, and then we can get a deal.
I would think of all people, Mickey, you would be troubled by the idea of 11 million, 12 million people living here, without social equality, to use your phrase.
Well,
I would think that you would wake up every day and that would trouble you.
It's troubling. It's also troubling the scheme that your side is pushing now, which is a two-tier non-citizenship status. Well, you would support the non-citizenship legalization. That is a formal two-tier system, which is worse. Yeah,
I don't think that's the ideal solution, and I don't think it would be a lasting solution. I think
I agree.
It's a political compromise, and I think if you had that solution, many more people would get to citizenship through that solution than anyone understands. The Senate bill probably would lead to, the CBO claims that the Senate bill would lead to 8 million people getting to citizenship. I think that number's, let's see, what's it called? The National Foundation for American Policy has a pretty good report where they show that 8 is probably pretty high. And the House version, which would get people to legal status, and then they could find another path to citizenship, thinks that as many as 6.5 million could get to citizenship that way.
My compromise, what you say is an impossibility, is simple. We do the enforcement things. We wait 4 or 5 years for they withstand court challenges, and then everybody can become a citizen. We don't need.
Yeah, okay.
We don't need these
but
two-tier
Mickey, Mickey, let me just be clear on the structure of what you're calling your compromise. I gather you're saying you want a bill that just does enforcement, E-Verify, border enforcement, and so on, and then you want America to trust you that once that all happens, then you will open up a path to legalize status and citizenship. But let me just be clear. Let me just be clear, Mickey. You're talking about not a legislation with a contingency in it. That okay, after 5 years of enforcement, we do blah, but just let's do the enforcement, and then we'll let you know how it works.
Well, first, the reason the other side should trust us is because the political imperative to legalize the 11 million will still be there, and it will be just as strong and even stronger. Unlike the other way around, whereas if they do legalization first, all the imperatives for enforcement will disappear.
Okay,
second,
but they're not just
second,
I'm willing to be clear.
The second is I'm willing to write into the law some contingency. It's very hard to write into law a contingency that both sides will trust, but I think it's probably possible, and there is a compromise there.
The Senate bill has such a contingency. It's not the contingency you want, but it's exactly what we're talking about. It has border and E-Verify triggers.
The contingency is it legalizes everybody, and then the only thing that's contingent is do they get green cards or not. That's a non-compromise. It's like you win, and if the trigger is satisfied, then you win even more. No, there's no trigger at all. The trigger has to come before the legalization, but one can come up with a trigger. If you said, do the E-Verify in place, do the exit entry, then a maximum of 5 years.
So exit entry is a lot harder than you think. Exit entry is very hard and very expensive.
Wait, what is exit entry for those of us who?
So 40% of the people, maybe half of the people who are here illegally actually came on legal visas and just didn't go home. And so exit entry would be checking whether they leave. And the trouble is, it's not that hard to do at airports and seaports, but it's really hard to do at land ports. Like to check everybody who goes out. It makes E-Verify look like child's play. It makes healthcare.gov look like child play.
There are high-tech executives who said it's easy. For example, what if every time somebody comes into the country with a visa, they get like a card with a chip, and they have
Who's going to pay for that?
They have to check
Who's
out.
We'll
pay for that. It's not that expensive. They have to check out. And if they don't check out, we'll come and get them. The NSA knows where everybody is all the time anyway. They'll come and get them.
Not practical.
Okay, let's. Why don't we turn to some kind of empirical questions?
Well, but the interesting thing
it's not that easy on immigration.
The interesting thing is this trigger, and I have an idea for the trigger that is a potential area of compromise. Okay, nobody wants to let Obama decide that E-Verify is in place. Nobody wants to have, my side won't do that. Tamar's side won't say, let's have another vote in Congress, because who knows what the Congress is going to do. We might move the goalposts on you. Why not have a factual requirement that E-Verify has to be up and running in like 90% of businesses, and have a lawsuit, have a trial with an impartial finder of fact, a federal judge.
Oh, good. Let's get judges. I see. We totally disagree about who should be in charge in America. I
trust judges to do facts more than I trust either Obama or the Congress. I don't like this solution anymore. It's just a potential compromise. Right now the way we do it is we have an administrative agency do it, and then the judge second guesses them. Why not just eliminate the agency and go right to the judge second guessing?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't think that's the best
trials
way
to come
run
up with facts. I'm holding out an olive branch here tomorrow.
I don't buy it.
It's a powerful olive branch.
I don't buy that. It really is not politically viable that we're going to leave the 11 or 12 million in limbo for 5 years, however long it is. It's just not going to happen. But I also don't think it's necessary. I don't think it's they're not. So what's the dip? What are you not giving them? You're not giving them the right to. You're going to continue the expensive law enforcement. You're going to continue the tracking people down and deporting them. You're going to continue people being afraid to go to their kids' PTA meeting because they're afraid to. I mean, it's just not. It's not good for the country.
We continue any longer. We have the status quo that we've lived with and prospered through for 30 years. And we keep that going for 5 more years.
Okay. You've sketched that out. What
and
you
in 5 years,
wait.
In 5 years, you get your amnesty. I don't see why that's such a problem for you.
Okay.
Well, I don't think amnesty is the most important part of the bill. To go back to that, the most important for me is fixing the system for the future.
I do want to ask some different questions. On the question of assimilation, is there any reason to think that immigrants from Latin America are not following the basic pattern in this country of assimilation? I mean, in terms of, when they start, when they speak English, what generation speaks English?
They actually learn faster. So I don't have the statistic on the top of my head, but somebody has done a great study where they compare the people who came, I think it was from 1880 and 1900, to the people who came between 1980 and 2000 or something like that. And they've compared the faction that learns English within the first 5 years. And last time it was, 100 years ago, it was a third, and this time it's half. So they're actually learning English faster. A lot of the parents have trouble learning English. They're, uneducated people. At first, learning a second language is not easy. So, they learn English. They don't always learn English perfectly. Then the kids, 90% of them speak English well or very well. And by the third generation, 75% of them cannot speak Spanish. They can't speak to their grandmothers. So English, they're doing fine. They buy homes, they get better jobs, they earn more. They don't, Michael Brown's done a great comparison where he talked about the difference between the way, say, Italians and Jews assimilated. Groups do show differences, and today Latinos are different than Asians. Asians, are in the Ivy League within a generation. That's not true for a large proportion of Latinos, although it's true for some. So, there's some differences there, but there's no evidence that they're going to be some kind of permanent underclass living on welfare. The trajectory they're headed for is, at the best, second generation is working poor. College attendance rates have gone way up. High school graduation rates have gone way up. I'm not worried about integration.
The permanent underclass will be the unemployed Americans who won't get good jobs because the market has been swamped with low-wage immigrants. Mickey, this is the voice of God. Okay, we're going to get to that. But do you acknowledge that this is not some kind of particular assimilation problem, that when you look at the things you would worry about, proficiency in English, even crime, whatever, compared to past groups or compared to other groups of their socioeconomic status, we don't have some kind of special problem? In general, I am not worried that much about assimilation, with a few caveats. First, we have affirmative action now, so that the incentive to maintain your distinct ethnic identity is greater. Second, we have a big welfare state now, so that increases the possibility of staying on welfare for a long time. And there's some evidence that the third generation of Latinos does some backsliding in that respect. And third and most important, this isn't like Italy, because Italy wasn't next door with a 2,000-mile border and a half-day's drive away. There's surveys that show that 52% of Mexicans think they have a right to be here legally. 65% think we don't have a right to enforce our border. We have a peculiar history where they think we, and they may be right, stole large parts of the Southwest from them. They have a historic claim to them. If you go to a pro-amnesty demonstration, you'll see signs saying, "This isn't your homeland. This is my homeland."
Okay,
Mexico is a peculiar
That's not what most unauthorized immigrants in America think. They came here because they think that things are better here than at home, and they want to be in America.
52% of all families in Mexico think Mexicans have a right to be in there. No, it's a Pew study, a completely respectable study. 52%. You would not say that 50%
and most people
of Italians don't think they have a right to be in America.
Lots of people say they'd like to move someplace else, and it's less than 5% of the people all around the world move.
Have a right to live in America. 65% say America has no right to enforce its borders. Mexico is a peculiar problem. That's like saying I'd like to
win the lottery someday.
I can't believe
I'd like to win the lottery.
I can't believe you don't think Mexico has a special status, special relationship with the United States. It's a special case. It's not like Italy. It's not like any other country. It's a special case.
Mickey, you're actually worried about revanchism, if I might use that word, for the one time per decade that I use it.
I'm worried that the assimilation process might be incomplete because Mexicans don't have to recognize a border and don't have to recognize a break with their country the way other immigrants have done. Mexico is a very good neighbor. We're lucky to have Mexico as a neighbor, but it presents peculiar problems for assimilation that can probably be handled, but we shouldn't pretend that they don't exist. In general, that's not my major reason for worrying about this. Okay, but I do think there's a potential for troublemakers, some sort of Basque-like, splinter group. I don't think a majority of Mexicans will be revanchists.
just empirically, it sounds like you more or less agree with Tamar that so far the assimilation looks like it's going more or less as it goes with other immigration groups. You alluded to some evidence of backsliding in third-generation immigrants toward welfare or something. I don't know if
Tamar not really backsliding, because the first generation, backsliding is the wrong word. The first generation, very little use of welfare. The second generation, very little use of welfare. I don't know what you're talking about in the third generation, but compared
more use
to
of welfare.
Other similar compared to other to similarly situated socioeconomic groups, less welfare, better educational outcomes, less crime.
Well, but the backsliding is first generation no welfare, second generation no welfare, third generation welfare. But look, yes, the answer to your question, Bob, is yes.
Mickey,
they're assimilating as well as you can expect given the way our society is currently set up. They're good people, they're good workers. I'm not saying they're bad people who shouldn't, who aren't aren't potentially good
workers. They're people with family values and community values, and the people who come are people with a lot of energy. They're entrepreneurs.
I agree with all those things. I agree with all
their
those
lives.
Things.
So it's not just widgets. Let's not.
I agree with all those things, and I agree that there's an ex-entrepreneurial, ex-hustle factor that works in their favor. On the other hand, the entire bottom half of the American economy is being pulled into a swamp of single motherhood.
Okay, so I disagree. I disagree that has to do with immigration. I disagree that has to do with immigration.
Well,
that's
but there are more of them.
Globalization and technology.
They swamp the labor market and make it a little worse.
Okay, so let's talk about the economics. Can I say my piece about the economics? So in 1950, nearly 2/3 of the American workforce, 64%, were high school dropouts. Today, less than 10% of the workforce are high school dropouts. Now, we don't need as many low-skilled workers as we once did, but we still need a lot. For example, restaurants used to be, 1950, 25 cents out of every food dollar was spent in a restaurant. Now it's 50 cents. So we need some low-end service workers, and we have many, many fewer. What used to be a big pool is now basically a Dixie cup. We're lucky that we have some immigrants that want to do those jobs, because when you have workers at the low end, that creates jobs for people in the middle rungs. If you can open another restaurant because there are enough busboys, that's another job for a chef, more jobs for waiters, a job for an architect to design the restaurant, work for the laundry to wash the tablecloths. So they're filling in at a low end of the economy, but in a way that actually helps grow the economy and create jobs for more skilled Americans who either have better language, better communication skills, a little more education, etc.
It's great.
It's not an economic drain. It's not swamping. It's helping grow the economy.
It's great for skilled Americans. It's terrible for unskilled Americans. Unskilled wages have stagnated for decades, while the wages of skilled Americans...
No economists think that's because of immigration.
Supply and demand. When there was a tight labor market in the 90s, unskilled wages went up dramatically. Now that there's
no serious economy thinks that wage stagnation is about immigrants.
And your plan would ensure that it permanently stays loose.
Okay, so I totally disagree.
That's the best way to fight
poverty. No serious economist thinks that the low-end wage stagnation is about immigrants. It's about technology. It's about globalization.
But George Borjas and Larry Katz are not serious economists.
Here's what George Borjas' biggest claim is, that over 20 years, immigrants caused a 4% drop in the wages of the 10% of Americans who don't have a high school diploma. That's not great, those people have cheaper food, cheaper housing, cheaper a lot of other things.
But the closer
it's not a big claim and it's not a big effect.
The closer you get to the bottom of the market, the worse the effect is. If you look at the effect on black high school dropouts, black high school dropouts are a problem. They're the underclass, and we need to get jobs for them too.
The solution is not denying the problem. There's a lot of problems with people who are out of the labor market.
The solution is a tight labor market.
Their color.
The solution is a tight labor market, so anybody who shows up
that's
to
not
pay
the end of the
wage.
solution. I disagree. I think the Africans Americans and others who are out of the labor market and have not been in the labor market for generations, that's a whole separate problem. We got to deal with that. But the answer is not
in the 90s when we had a tight labor market.
Okay, but
in the 90s when we had a tight labor market, it was the best decade Black America has ever had. We need a tight labor market so we can have more decades like that. We can't just write off Black America the way Tamar is doing.
I'm not suggesting we write off Black America, and that's a cheap shot. I'm not writing off
It was a cheap shot.
Tamar,
it was a cheap shot, but I liked it.
But do you feel good afterwards?
I
really?
feel terrible now.
Okay, that's the main thing. But Tamar, did I hear you start to agree with Mickey that yes, to some extent, black high school dropouts will face a harder time finding a job?
No, I think they have a hard time finding a job for a lot of reasons. It's not generally that they're mostly not looking for jobs, or they don't want a job. They're not in the labor market. We're talking about people who are in the labor market and who are here. I mean, I'm not saying this is not a racial thing. We're talking about the people who are out of the labor market and are not trying to find jobs. We don't, some of them are black. It's not about race. It's about there is a group of people in America who are not attached to the labor market, teens especially, and have not been attached to the labor market for a long time, and their parents weren't attached to the labor market, and they don't have work habits, and there are a lot of problems. We need to address those problems. The government and the rest of society should be working on those problems. I spent a lot of my life thinking about how we should work on those problems. But the answer is not keeping out other workers in the meantime, or having industries.
The best answer is a tight labor market. What's wrong with that answer?
I don't think so. Because what you're going to see is when there's some industries that can't move, but if the agriculture now, specialty agriculture, fruits and vegetables, it's 75% by basically the Department of Labor's own, recognition, 75% unauthorized workers. If they don't have workers, they're going to move to other places. We're going to start to get our fruit from New Zealand and our milk from, powdered milk from China. Who knows? A lot of these industries can move.
Some of them will move, and some of them will pay their workers $14 an hour instead of $10. And heaven forbid, some of them will actually train Americans to do the job.
Yeah, we should do a lot more training.
Why shouldn't employers have to train
I agree
workers?
With that, but I agree people should train
Well, the tight labor market
is
what the farms in Wisconsin are starting to train Americans to do the jobs because they can't find illegal immigrants.
There's still going to be labor shortages, and yes, you should have a system where employers have to try to find Americans first, and if they can't find them, they should have a way to hire immigrants. But I'm not saying they should just ignore the American workers.
Even Paul Ryan, who's now emerged as a major champion of amnesty, says that the labor shortage won't materialize in 10 years. Well, let's do 8 years of enforcement, and then in 8 years we can plan on dealing with this labor shortage that's going to happen in 10 years.
The construction industry has shed 2 million jobs since the downturn, and it's just now starting to come back. And they are going to need a lot of workers. And yes,
why shouldn't they hire Americans?
Well, they should if there are Americans who want to do the jobs and who want to get trained.
There are plenty of Americans who want to do construction work.
But there isn't. You're wrong. That's where you're wrong. You're just making that up. It's not true.
The other problem, well, let's find out. The other problem is that you get jobs where you have to be Spanish speaking in order to get the job. If you want to be a short order cook in Los Angeles and you don't speak Spanish, you're not going to get hired because the entire cook staff is Latino, and you have to be able to talk to them. So it sets up a positive discrimination against Americans. If you talk to blacks, they will say they're last hired, they're first fired. They say there is discrimination. It does make a difference if you're black. So in a tight labor market,
I believe in anti-discrimination enforcement. I believe in anti-discrimination enforcement.
But these are all bureaucratic mechanisms.
I don't think we should be starving the economy of labor. I don't think we should be starving the economy of labor. I think the way you get economic growth is you add labor and one of the ways is you add labor and it attracts capital and you put it with innovation. That's how you grow the economy.
We have tens of millions of unemployed.
Why would we want to starve the economy of labor?
We have tens of millions of unemployed. The economy is not starved of labor.
It's not. But they don't. We have 11 million unemployed and we have 4 million job openings because of skills mismatches. And sure, we should try to train people to fill those jobs, but
we're not talking about skilled. We would probably agree on skilled immigration. Now we're talking about unskilled immigration.
Well, we have.
Our construction workers going unfilled
but the 4 million openings. The 4 million openings aren't for PhD scientists.
But they're not for construction workers. They're for people who can operate machine tools.
Yeah, well, so a lot of immigrants can operate machine tools. That's the point.
Mickey, let me ask you, Mickey, do you concede that there are some efficiency gains that when you have these people who, most of them probably have a strong work ethic, they're motivated.
The most efficient system is open borders. Yes, I agree. Efficiency isn't everything.
Okay, so there are benefits to Americans broadly from the efficiencies they bring, possibly including Americans at lower income levels. You concede the point that it probably is good for the GDP, broadly speaking,
it's
for
definitely
economic
good for
efficiency.
I can see
it lowers
that it's good
prices
for, the GDP.
for certain things.
I can see that it's good for the GDP. I don't concede that Mexicans are such magical workers that they come displace you from a job, but they're so productive that you'll get an equal or better job than the one you just lost. No. There's supply and demand at the lower end of the labor market, and the unskilled workers get screwed while the GDP grows. And I think I'm a social egalitarian. I think everybody should have a job that pays a decent wage
and have advantages. So you look in a field like transportation, it turns out that all the people who actually, are many more of the people who, in moving companies, for example, who load the things on the truck are immigrants, and the people who do the driving are Americans. They already come, so even in low-skilled occupations, even within sectors, the immigrants fill the low-end jobs that allow there to be more work and more production.
If you're smart enough to do the skilled job, if you're a stupid American, you're screwed. I don't want.
No, that's not because they're being able to drive and be able to speak English are not about being smart. They're about skills they already have.
Well, sometimes there's skills you already had. Sometimes there's the skills to be a foreman or to open a restaurant. Not everybody has those skills. I don't have those skills. So it creates a meritocracy, a vicious meritocracy, where people who are just willing to do basic labor and are American get the short end of the stick. It creates
There are not very many people like that. There are not very many people like that. That's the point. There are not very many people like that.
A nightmarish Hong Kong-like
I think there are not many people like that.
Very
and
productive,
of course,
but not any place we want to live.
Mickey, I have a question.
Look, I agree. I'll agree with this. I agree that economic efficiency is not the only standard. I agree that we want to have some kind of that we do have social values and we want to think about them. But I also think that that you're having a fantasy about about the workers that are available at the low end and what people will do and how many a pool of that kind of workers there are. And yes, we want a system where employers train people. Yes, we want a system where Americans get the jobs first. Yes, we want a system where there's some wage controls. I'm not just saying open the market, let anyone come, pay them $3 an hour and ignore it. I'm saying this has to happen in a somewhat regulated system. I mean, I'm a free market person and Republican, but it has to happen in a somewhat regulated system.
No, but in the system, there has to be some
regulation to this. There has to be some regulation to this, but the system should be more market-based in the sense that when employers can't find American workers, they should be able to hire immigrant workers.
What I want is not pie in the sky. I want the economy we had in the 90s, where the unskilled workers made huge leaps in wages.
And there were a lot of immigrants
because the economy was so hot, it attracted both immigrants and
a lot of immigrants.
Now the economy's not so
hot. Millions
so
of immigrants coming. Probably, I don't know the numbers, but I know the numbers in the 2000s. I'm guessing in the 2000s every year from 2003 to 2009, 350,000 unauthorized immigrants.
Right. So the economy gets hot again, and we're not going to attract more illegals. Without it.
If we have a system that allows them to come legally, they'll come legally.
Well, if everybody who wanted to come legally could come legally, then we would have no controls at all. Then it would just be open borders.
No, but the
control means you want to restrict it less than what the natural flow of the market would provide.
I think the quota should be in line with market need, and I think market need should feed into the quota. When there's a lot of bona fide matches of employers who've tried to find Americans and can't, and been required to jump through the hoops and do the things and prove their need, when they hire an immigrant, and that should register as part of the need, and the quota should go up. And in down years, when there aren't many of those bona fide needs, the quota should go down.
But again,
I need to get clearer on this very issue. I just don't know enough. In the immigration reform that is contemplated and embodied in the Senate bill, what is the deal on permissible ongoing influx? My impression was that generally speaking, the idea was you shut the border down and that people, you're only the amnesty or whatever you want to call it is only available for people who are already in the country.
There's a huge increase in legal immigration and in guest workers. Doubling of legal immigration and almost doubling of guest workers.
Let me explain what it is. So there's high-skilled immigrants as well, right? We've been talking mostly about low-skilled immigrants. There's a big increase in temporary high-skilled. There's a big increase in permanent high-skilled. for low-skilled, non-farm low-skilled, people working in restaurants, janitors, meat processing, for the first time ever, we have a program for them. It's a pretty well-designed program. I call it sort of 21st century mousetrap. The workers don't actually, in the most traditional guest worker programs, there's one employer and the worker works for him the whole time, and people compare it to indentured servitude. In the new program, people can leave their employer, and so they have more labor rights, and the quota goes up and down with the economy, and it's pretty streamlined for employers, so they do have to try to find Americans first, but if they can't, they get a pretty good shot at hiring immigrants. The problem is it's way too small. So it's a product of a negotiation between the AFL and the U.S. Chamber, and the U.S. Chamber won a lot of the design of the program, or union and business agreed on a lot of the design of the program. For example, the idea that the worker can move from employer to employer, work for everybody, but the program is so small that it's laughable, right. And construction is largely cut out of it. And in the House, so there is a program. That's the good news. And it's pretty well designed. And if you saw it in a drawing and there was no scale key next to it, you'd say pretty good program. But it's too small to be useful. And the House is going to try to expand it. But it's your fears of doubling and big numbers and stuff. That's not because of the low skilled program in the Senate bill.
Well, you're saying the doubling of legal immigration is all high skilled?
It's high skilled. There's family. There's some
well,
low skilled.
Family is low skilled.
There's a low skilled. The low skilled temporary program is, yeah, but I mean it's the adding on is mostly high skilled.
It goes from $1 million a year to $2 million a year. Is the extra $1 million all high skilled?
You're exaggerating. It goes from about 1.2 to about 1.7 is mostly what it goes to. And yeah, the big things are, and this is crazy, and this should change. It says anybody anywhere in the world with a PhD gets to come and is outside the quota. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Look,
but that's high skill.
I'm happy to fiddle with the quotas, but to have quotas and to enforce them at all, you need control first. And if we have legalization before enforcement, we will never have control.
I'm saying you can't get to control first. I'm saying you can't get to control
because it's politically impossible because you won't accept it. Well, that's not an answer.
No, let me say why I'm saying it. Because a key part of the control is to have a legal way for people to come. The three ways that
here's the solution for that.
Three-legged stool. Can I just say my case?
Okay.
It's a three-legged stool where the third of it, some of it is border, some of it is E-Verify, and some of it is a legal way to get here. And that goes back to my prohibition metaphor. You couldn't get control of alcohol without creating legal outlets. So once you have legal outlets, the control is much easier. I'm saying you can't get control until you also have a legal system that works.
Well, here's my proposed compromise. I'm trying here. We have enforcement first, and as part of the first tranche of reforms before legalization, we have an increase in legal immigration. Guest workers, raise the quotas, especially from Mexico, because Mexico has a special relationship and we want to respect them and give them something so they have something at stake in this process. So we have a first tranche of reforms, which is E-Verify, the fence, exit entry, plus increasing the Tamara Jacoby increase of legal workforce program. And the numbers you have mentioned seem entirely reasonable to me. So that's a big concession on my part, but we don't have legalization until after the enforcement is in place.
Yeah. I'm not going to
agree with that. You like the concession in and of itself?
I do like the concession in and of itself. I think the most important
you were talking about 300,000, 400,000. Is that not right? Or that's not unreasonable.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's a very good concession. Yeah, good. Okay, that's great.
It's
a deal. It's a deal.
We found common ground.
But the part of the deal is we have to postpone the legalization until after.
How are you feeling about that, Tamar?
Well, I actually play this game in Washington, so I can't negotiate with myself, on TV. But I like the. I mean, I think the most important part of reform is finding a way for less skilled people to come legally. And here's why. Let me back out a little here, because maybe this will sort of take us also out of this little patch we're in. I mean, to me, why immigration is important, right? We live in a globalizing world, right? We do need the high-skilled people. We do need some of the low-skilled people. We want this to be a system going forward where we can get talent broadly defined legally and where we're open and welcoming to it, if you have this big part of it that's illegal, it taints all of it. And it's bad for the country. It taints the country. I'm not just shilling for these businesses. I think for the country, we want to be open to this talent and energy, and we across the board. But if you have, any number of million of unauthorized people at the bottom, it's also bad for how we're doing attracting the people at the top. And so the most important part for me is that in the future we have a system that works to get the people we want and need and keep out the people we don't want.
But
and I think we agree on that, basically.
Yeah, but the system can't just ratify the market equilibrium. The market equilibrium is everybody in the world comes here until America is such a miserable place that they'd rather stay home.
No, but I don't think that is the market equilibrium.
We don't want that equilibrium.
We disagree on what the market equilibrium would be. I think the market equilibrium would be much more workable. I mean, again, I've seen it in the past 5 years since the downturn. A quarter as many people come. People don't want to come.
As long as Mexico is booming, and the United States is stagnating, you're right. But Mexico isn't going to boom forever, and I hope the United States isn't going to stagnate forever.
I predict in 10 years we're going to be at a place where very few Mexicans want to come, and we're going to wonder where to get people. We're still going to be having agriculture. We're still going to be opening new meat processing plants. We're going to have the fastest growing job over the next 10 years is home health aid.
We'll have no problem finding.
And I don't know if that comes, we'll have no problem. Are you kidding?
There's no problem letting in more immigrants. There's no problem letting in more immigrants, but once they're in, you can't kick them out. But we're going to have trouble where to find them.
We're going to have trouble where to find, as we need more home health aides and more personal care aides and like that, we're going to have, Mexicans are going to, and fewer Mexicans are going to want to come. We're going to start looking to Central America, but that's going to end. Already you go to the fields in California and Mexicans are doing this sort of second-tier jobs and Hondurans are doing the hard work. And in 10 years, 20 years, we're going to be wondering, where do we find low-skilled immigrants?
Well, that would happen under either system, won't it? I mean, if the world runs out of workers, then we're either going to have to automate, right? So, but there are plenty of Bangladeshis and Indians and Chinese and Filipinos. I think we don't have to worry about running out of people who are willing to come to the United States at the moment.
At the moment, no.
Even Paul Ryan says, even at the current system, there's no labor shortage for 10 years. So that was a bad concession that he made.
I don't think that is what he says, for what it's worth.
Mickey, are you saying you have a preference for people from those other countries over people from Latin America?
No, I'm for diversity, but I think Mexico has a special relationship and they should get some sort of special deal. I'm weird on that. Mexico historically has a roundabout flow where people live in Mexico, they come here. Other countries don't have that. We should have some system that respects that in a limited, controlled way.
And what I think is it's about that, but it's more about you do want communities here. And people do, no one wakes up in the morning, and looks at a map and just says, oh, I don't know, do I want to go to England or America? Maybe England. People go where they know somebody.
Right.
And where they already have relatives and where they know somebody who already came. And that's actually good for the country where they're going because that means you're going to have communities. And
but it also means that legal immigration attracts more illegal immigration because people know legals and they come illegally.
Not if there aren't work. Not if there's not work. Not if there isn't work. But I think you do want to sort of honor those networks because they ultimately are good for the country and for the social.
I agree, but I just wanted diversity. The history with Mexico is fraught enough that I wouldn't want our immigrants to be 100% Mexican.
No,
or even 100% Latino. I want people Chinese, I want Bangladeshis, I want Africans. I want a whole panoply and rainbow.
But I think it should be, the role of the law is to follow the reality of what's out there, not to, I think, that's when you're going to be most successful with the law. So if you have a lot of people coming from Mexico, it doesn't make sense to start a whole new stream from the place where there's not a lot of interest in coming.
We have country quotas now, so you're saying throw them out?
Yeah, I think I would seriously amend them. I mean, they're a big problem because they limit the numbers of people from the countries. So if you want to come from if you're a high skilled person, you want to come from India, it's a many decade queue, I think, at this point. If you're the sister of a Filipino who's here, you literally wait 22 years to get in. The problem is there's a lot of people who want to come from India who, we might benefit, and a lot of people who want to come from Mexico legally. And there's not very many people who want to come from Belgium, but they have the same quota.
That suggests that we're not going to run out of people, the way you said. If there's such a long waiting.
What we may run out of is time. We have almost done that. Let me see if I understand some of the differences. What's that?
What have we not talked about?
Exactly. I mean, I think you've come close to covering the waterfront. But let me see. So first of all, a couple of things you agree on. You agree that as far as the pattern of assimilation we're seeing with these Latin American immigrants, it's not something to be concerned about. It's comparable to past groups that have wound up assimilated. You agree?
Yeah, wait, let me just add one little footnote there. I think that, we do have to pay attention to it, right? I think, right now, there's studies show that there are people waiting in line to learn English. O'Reilly goes on TV and complains nobody wants to learn English. Truth is, adults are waiting in line. So I think the country could do more to help people integrate. I'm not saying I'm worried about it, but I do think we could do something about it a little better.
Okay, you agree that they contribute to economic efficiency and GDP. You disagree on the extent to which they disadvantage certain sectors of the native-born unemployed population.
And degree to which. I mean, I agree there is some disadvantaging there, but yes, we think we differ on the degree to which.
And those are those are the very people who have done the worst in the economy of the last 3 decades. So they're the people who are getting screwed by globalization, and now we screw them even more by importing unskilled workers from abroad to compete with them. I don't think that's very fair.
Okay, so I don't agree with that language, even close.
Okay. Now, a couple of things I'm not sure about. Do you agree that that E-Verify, that the system for documenting that American employers are in fact employing, legally eligible workers?
I'm 100% for it.
You're for it. Do you both agree that as a technical and logistical matter, it is workable, but there are possible legal challenges to it?
No, there's a big gap. It doesn't catch right now identity theft. So if I go with try to get a job with a totally made up Social Security number, it'll flag me. If I go with my sister's Social Security number, it won't flag me. So it needs work. And we don't know what the solution to that is. We're not going to pay for biometrics, and there are people who talk about knowledge-based authentication. There's still problems with E-Verify. It will be better than having no system, but even the people behind it recognize we're talking about implementing E-Verify and then trying to refine it. Yeah, so E-Verify is good, E-Verify is critical, but E-Verify is not going to be the total answer for a while.
The other members of Tamar's coalition oppose E-Verify and will fight it.
No, more and more businesses are using E-Verify. The U.S. Chamber, the National Restaurant Association, businesses have been for E-Verify for several years
now. But the Chamber of Commerce is for E-Verify?
Of course.
They're not going to join the lawsuit?
No, they were part of a lawsuit 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. They're now people don't want the chamber doesn't want states doing their own E-Verify. People want the chamber, which represents businesses that do business in a lot of different states, want a uniform system. Yeah. But businesses increasingly in favor of E-Verify, and most small businesses are still hesitant. They don't have an HR person they're worried about. But in the restaurant industry, for example, 50% of the corporate-owned restaurants are using E-Verify, and we did a survey. 80% would recommend it to a colleague.
That's great.
People want to be on the right side of the law.
If you got La Raza and the ACLU on board, we might have a deal, but you won't.
I don't represent them.
I understand.
You keep talking about your side. I don't have a side.
Okay, so anyway, Mickey, on E-Verify, Mickey is mainly worried about political opposition that leads to possibly successful legal challenges. I'm sure you both agree that
and I'm not.
You're not worried about that.
And what I would say about that, just to condense, every poll of native-born American, non-Hispanic whites or whatever, native-born Americans, the general public, enforcement is the thing that they want the most out of immigration reform. The preponderance of political weight is in favor of immigration enforcement. There may be a suit, but I don't believe that immigration enforcement is going to get derailed in the way that Mickey foresees. I think that's just not even close to plausible.
It happened in '86, and I've talked with enough activists who hate it.
There wasn't good enforcement provisions in the '86 law. It wasn't that it got derailed by lawsuits. It wasn't in the law. There was no guest worker program.
They had to do some administrative finagling to undo some requirements that were actually in the law.
Okay.
No, it wasn't.
Another
in California, we passed Prop 187. The courts threw it out. There's a whole history of courts throwing out enforcement measures.
That's not the same as federal immigration enforcement.
It's not the same, but it's the same basic dynamic. The same basic.
Okay. Another technical question: is the border in principle controllable?
Yes. If you add border security alone will not end illegal immigration. You need border security plus E-Verify plus a legal way for workers to get here.
Mickey, how do you think?
Well, I think if you do those three things, yes, the border is controllable. Also, I also want a visa system using the border in a non-physical sense, and also the fence is the most obvious simple thing, and the fence is going to be attacked viciously in court because Mexico thinks it's a sign of disrespect.
The fence is not.
But there's already a fence.
The Secretary of Homeland Security used to say, "Show me a 50-foot fence, I'll show you a 50-foot ladder."
Well, fine, but the fence
alone is not very effective.
The fence is very effective.
What's effective on the border is What's effective on the border is the way they prosecute people. That when they used to just bring them in and fingerprint them and then send them back, it wasn't very effective. Now that they make them go through a court proceeding and most of them stay overnight in jail, it's a pretty effective deterrent. It's not the physical barriers. It's the
physical barriers. People go through the desert in Arizona because the California border is fenced. They can't get through in California. They go through in Arizona. It creates a huge hassle factor that is a very good first line of defense. There's a reason people have fences. Most fences can be climbed over, but most people have fences because they help.
And the big picture, I'm for border enforcement. I mean, we're quibbling.
People are worried about the fence not because they think it won't work, because they're worried that it will work.
Yeah, I don't think the fence will do very much, but I think it needs to be part of the equation.
Okay, well, we have a deal.
So neither of you thinks the border is entirely controllable via border control alone.
I would certainly think that.
I probably think it's more controllable, but I think all these three elements are good elements to have. So where's the argument?
E-Verify is the most important in my view. I mean, E-Verify and a legal way for people to get here.
I agree. I agree with E-Verify. So.
Okay, so there's stuff you agree on, stuff you disagree on. You even agree on the key elements. It's partly a question of the order in which you want things to happen, and what is contingent on what.
The whole debate is a debate about the order, and as long as the other side says, well, it's politically a non-starter to have a reasonable order where you have enforcement first, there might not be an agreement.
For what it's worth, I think there's a good chance that there will be an agreement.
There might be an
agreement. It won't be Mickey's deal, but it won't be Mickey's deal.
It'll be a bad deal.
Just for what it's worth.
Okay. Well, I think somewhere in here lies all the common ground and the points of disagreement, and we will sort them all out.
The other thing I would say, which maybe I didn't say clearly, is I agree with Mickey that ultimately the solution should be people get to citizenship, right? I mean, Mickey made a distinction between he didn't like legal status and not citizenship. I too agree. Ultimately, I don't want a society where we have two classes of people. I think, there too, it's a sort of a question about timing. House Republicans are not going to vote to have that happen soon. But I think it can happen eventually.
The whole non-citizenship thing is designed to con House Republicans and particularly their constituents into going along with the system that will eventually produce citizenship, as
they're the ones who...
Well. Yeah, because they want to get the donations from the businesses. And while conning their constituents, so they've hit on this ridiculous non-citizenship idea. Everybody who works here should be a citizen. This is America. People who work here should be citizens. And if we don't, so the question is control.
I would say people who want to be citizens. I mean, a lot of people, but anyway. But
if they don't want to be citizens, that's a different point.
Okay. We basically agree that ultimately the people who spend their lives here and work here should have citizenship open to them. But there too, it's sort of a question of timing and sequence and what's politically plausible.
Okay, so we're ending on a point of agreement. Not to mention the gracious compromise that Mickey offered and that seemed to be more or less embraced.
The answer is that Tamara and I were in a debate in Arizona a few months ago, and she proposed that, and it seemed reasonable to me. So.
Wait, is that true? You stole her idea?
No, I credited her with the idea.
Wait, give us the 15-second version of the compromise for those who may have lapsed.
The compromise was just that as part of an enforcement first regime, the first tranche of reforms, along with the enforcement, could include Tamar's reasonable expansion of legal workers. It's not going to 400,000. The numbers she uses aren't enough to swamp the labor market, yet they're enough. If employers want them, it's enough to we can throw them that concession, and also throw to Mexico. I think it's important to honor the fact that Mexico is a good neighbor, and there should be ways for people to come here legally and work.
Okay,
seems reasonable.
So we do close on
So
we do close on common ground.
I do think we talk about it very differently, but I do think there is a lot of common ground, and I do think it comes down to a lot about sort of when we do what.
Yeah, well, I think that's the whole debate.
All right. Well, thank you both. I've learned a lot, and
thank you.